In our feature this week, an extended version of a report we brought you previously about a bacteria called Brucellosis that most experts thought had been virtually eradicated long ago. It may be making a comeback of sorts. Colleen Bradford Krantz has the story.
The near eradication of brucellosis, a costly bacterial disease that affected a large number of U.S. cattle herds in the early part of the last century, is one of the nation's major livestock and public health triumphs.
It was very prevalent in 1934 when our brucellosis program began. They figured maybe 50% of the herds were infected. The program began. They started testing for the disease, removing those animals that were infected. By 1957, they reckoned about 13% of the herds were infected in the United States, like 234,000 herds. And then in the early 40s, they developed the vaccine. In 2008, for the first time, there were no infected herds in the United States.
Experts worry, however, that infected wildlife, particularly elk and bison in the Yellowstone National Park area, are slowly reversing some of that progress in cattle. The disease can cause cows to abort their calves and have milk production fall off dramatically. There's additional concern that another strain of Brucella bacteria that particularly affects hogs is being spread by wild boar in the southern United States.
Now, since 2008, of course, we've had a number of herds that have been infected, but they've been infected by wildlife. Back in the 30s, it was people buying cattle that were infected, and those cattle infected their cattle. That's all gone, but now it's wildlife coming into farmyards and ranches and aborting and passing the disease to cattle.
Dr. Clark, one of USDA Veterinary Services' top experts on brucellosis, says livestock will sniff or lick the aborted materials and easily become infected with the resilient bacteria. Brucella, the bacteria that causes the disease, can also be passed to humans, often through unpasteurized milk, and causes fevers and other symptoms that, left untreated, can become chronic. With Brucella, which cost the livestock industry about $400 million annually in the mid-1900s, now nearly eliminated from U.S. pastures and feedlots, human infections have also fallen.
They've proven in a number of countries that if you can control it in animals, it's controlled in humans also.
Because the vaccine currently used on cattle and bison isn't as effective on wildlife like elk, scientists are working on a new version. There's one problem. Several types of Brucella bacteria are included on the federal government's list of possible biological terrorism agents. As a result, the bacteria falls under strict regulatory controls, limiting study to the nation's most secure scientific laboratories, like the National Animal Disease Center in Ames, Iowa.
That meant biolevel 3 containment for both laboratory and animal work, and that's expensive, and most places do not have that capability. And so for that reason, then you saw the number of laboratories and scientists actually working in the large animal hosts go down.
Recently, some USDA officials have agreed with animal scientists that it may be time to consider removing the disease from that list so researchers can work outside the lab. At a minimum, they hope research will be allowed near Yellowstone.
It's still kind of a work in progress, as I understand it. The agent is already running loose in those wild populations out there, so you're not introducing anything into that environment that's not already there.
Dr. Olson points out that even with an effective vaccine for wildlife, finding a way to administer it to free-ranging animals such as elk would be problematic. In Montana, state veterinarian Dr. Marty Zalewski, who has seen area cattle producers have to deal with the return of the disease, has been encouraging federal officials to move ahead with a policy change. If approved, 2 types of Brucella bacteria could be removed from the select agents list. National security officials, however, are still weighing the pros and cons.
There is a fairly long history of nations wanting to weaponize brucellosis and use it as a bioterrorist weapon. I believe that certainly the USSR, the prior Russia, had a program. I believe this country looked at it as well.
this might be one form of biological warfare.
I believe that historical record is really the primary reason why this agent was included in this list. But I would argue that that's actually it's misplaced.
Zalewski says treatment and prevention of the disease has come a long way.
If you're a terrorist and you choose your weapon of choice as Brucella abortus, you're not the brightest crayon in the box. This disease we have a ready test for this disease. The incubation period, so the time from exposure until illness, can be several weeks. We have a very inexpensive and effective treatment for this disease. Contrast this type of an agent to Ebola or anthrax. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Zalewski worries that federal officials could, in trying to protect human health by keeping Brucella on the list, inadvertently increase human cases by not allowing the scientific community a simpler way to study brucellosis in wildlife.
My concern is that without interventions that are effective, brucellosis is going to spread throughout the entire contiguous range of elk in the Rockies and the Northwest. You know, based on a map that I saw from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, that includes anywhere between 10 to 12 states. And so I don't know whether that's going to happen in 20 years, 30 or 40 years, but I think the outcome, if we don't develop better tools, is somewhat bleak.
The USDA has plenty of info on brucellosis. Just Google brucellosis USDA.